dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your groovy strings section host, Madelyn.
I'm your intense Latin choir host, Emma.
Mine was not based on anything. Yours was aggressively targeted.
No, it wasn't. There's a lot of video games that use intense Latin choirs. I'm a big fan of them.
Anyway, you've tuned in for a side quest episode of Talk This, where
we just did this. Sorry.
I wasn't trying to do a looping thing, although that would be very thematically appropriate too.
I thought you were prompting me to say it's dangerous to podcast alone again.
Just had to take a breath.
Okay.
Just waiting for the downbeat.
Right.
Anyway, this week on our side quest, it's my pick. And I decided that we're going to be chatting anything and everything video game soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I said last week that I would try to figure out a way for this episode to be Mother's Day themed. And I know what you're thinking. This episode is not Mother's Day themed. Well, in most senses of the word, you are right. But I found a way to prove you wrong. And that is that, okay, so obviously I was thinking about soundtracks because last week one of our games, our new game, was A Short Hike, which got a lot of praise for its soundtrack, right?
For its boppin' tunes, yeah.
It's boppin' tunes, absolutely correct. But another thing that made me think of this is that just maybe last week, a couple weeks ago, time has no meaning, right? But sometime in the nearish past, we got a text from our mom with an article from the Washington Post about the composer of Animal Crossing.
We did. You're right.
It really planted the seed for this episode in my brain.
So it is Mother's Day themed.
Exactly. I brought it around. With that, and with the fact that I've been just running around the house singing the Yakuza 0 karaoke tracks.
As you do.
It felt like an appropriate time to talk soundtracks. It's always an appropriate time to talk soundtracks. I'm very excited for this episode.
Me too.
Yeah. Emma, do you want to start with your quiz question? Or are you saving this?
Sure. So if you just our brand here, part of our brand is that we were Kingdom Hearts children, which means that we've been playing a lot of Kingdom Hearts. And if you played any Kingdom Hearts, you might be familiar with the tune that plays over the menu.
Literally, if you've played any Kingdom Hearts,
yeah,
you must, there's no way to have avoided it.
Or even not. One of my friends in high school was just like, oh yeah, I know how to play Dearly Beloved on the piano. Just 'cause. Because it's a pretty song on the piano, I guess.
Yep.
So, yes. So there's all these different versions of the song Dearly Beloved from Kingdom Hearts. So one of my quiz questions, or my only quiz question, I guess, we'll see if I come up with more, is which version is our favorite? Because there's a whole bunch of versions at this point.
Do you want me to answer first?
Yeah, you answer first.
Okay, look, my favorite is always going to be the simple and clean, original version.
I am rather, the waves that are in the background of that one is extremely nostalgia-inducing.
Right?
Yeah.
I just think it's just the essence of the song. And then, of course, the fact that the original song is so simple, I need to stop using that word. I almost immediately went to is so clean, not even on purpose.
Minimalist.
Yes, because of the minimalism of that original theme, that's what allows all of these kind of multiple variations on it.
That's true.
So we gotta rep the OG, I think.
Yeah, part of the reason my favorite is the one from 358 Ever 2, and part of the reason is that it's the first one. What?
Nothing. Part of the reason is that it's on brand for you to be that to be your favorite.
I know, that's very on brand for me, I'm aware. But part of the reason I like that so much is it's the first one in the release sequence to not really have the piano as the main instrument. So it's like a flute or some sort of woodwind that's doing the main melody. which is both thematically appropriate since it's sort of the first game to not be from Sora's perspective, and also just provides like a cool contrast when you get to it, when you're like listening to it in a sequence. That being said, I really also like Coated in Cheese for being like happy. They're like bouncy versions.
You're not allowed to say positive things about Coated in any way.
But the Dearly Beloved, like, it has like this cool sort of like extra notes that add like a bubbliness to it, which you wouldn't think this song, listening to the first one, could be like cheerful or hopeful. Or I guess it's sort of hopeful, but it's a very sort of somber song or bittersweet sort of song, and these ones are a little bit bouncier, and it's impressive how much you can change the range of emotions in this one song.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it's very emblematic of the series soundtrack as a whole, and something that I think many very successful video game soundtracks do very well is iterations on a theme.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing that Dearly Beloved is able to be so adapted that it works so well, both very simplistically and like the Birth by Sleep one is just this incredible orchestral, gigantic swelling version, and that you can do sort of anything in the middle, and it works. When is there going to be like an electric guitar one? That'll be for Yozora's game.
Yeah. I'd be down for that. The rockin' Dearly Beloved.
Yeah. So that's our first of many, probably, Kingdom Hearts corners.
I mean, even if you don't like Kingdom Hearts as a game series, I think it's hard to deny how impressive the soundtrack is. Both from, like, I don't think these games would work if you changed the soundtrack, basically.
Do you think that the soundtrack is what allows for some emotional buy-in to the increasingly ridiculous story?
Oh, yeah.
Is that what you mean?
I mean, I don't think... Birth by Sleep I will always pretty much consider a lesser 358 Days Over 2. But the soundtrack in that, like Terra's theme and Aqua's theme especially, I just love those songs so much, and they just work so well in the moments where they need to work, even though the voice direction sucks in that game. Like, the music just carries you there. And that's really impressive when nobody told Jason Dohrig how to speak. So
nobody informed me he was playing a human.
The fact that his really emotional scenes still work is like all due to the soundtrack. So you gotta give props where it's due.
Oh, props given. So if we're talking childhood soundtrack attachments, I want to kick it back to some very different types of soundtracks that I feel like were among the first ones that made a real impression on me. So Kingdom Hearts is in the kind of one category. I feel like there are a few distinct categories of video game soundtracks that you can look at. Kingdom Hearts is like a pivotal example, like an emblematic, that's funny, example of kind of the orchestral soundtrack, right?
Yeah.
So you've got that, right? And then you have soundtracks that are made up of like popular music.
Yeah.
And I feel like those in many ways have fallen out of vogue in recent years. I can't think of as many.
Well, there's a lot of complications to go with licensing music, which we could talk about a little bit at some point. But when you're licensing existing music, it can be difficult years down the line.
Yes, and that's something that, and we'll talk about that later too, but you see that with film and TV as well being an issue. So maybe that's why it's fallen a little bit out of vogue. But some of the earliest soundtracks that I have real kind of vivid memories of are FIFA, right?
Yeah.
The music that would play like between the games. And
I think FIFA still does license music.
I hope they do, because that was a really important part of the game back with, like, whatever we had, FIFA 05 or whatever it was. Also, the Burnout games, specifically Burnout 3 Takedown, but they do have this in all of them, with the DJ, whose name I can't remember, who plays music for you.
I don't remember his name either.
I don't remember his name, but that music was really good. By which I mean it was really like mid-2000s kind of alt rock, which really scratched the right itch at the time, I guess. And of course, the iconic Disney Extreme Skate Adventure, featuring like Lil Romeo and all that stuff. So those live in a very different category of game soundtrack, especially because more or less for all, except maybe Disney Skate Adventure, they exist in this kind of weird like radio mode, right? Where they're not really the soundtrack. I mean, they are the soundtrack to the game, but in the case of Burnout, it's almost diegetic, right? In that theoretically, that's the music that your car is playing.
Yeah.
And in the case of FIFA, it's not playing while you're playing the actual game. It's just menu hype music.
Yeah. I don't think any music plays when you're actually playing the game in FIFA.
No, it's
announcers.
Andy.
Are there announcers?
Yeah, there were two announcers, and I'm sure it's not maybe it is the same guys, but it's probably not the same guys anymore. Andy Gray. Yeah.
I think once you break it down into those two categories, though, it starts getting a little bit murkier, especially as you look more towards modern games, right? Because you get stuff that, like the Persona series, a lot of the music sort of sounds like, just because there's lyrics in it, I guess. But it's composed specifically for the game. Or you get things like the Final Fantasy VII Remake OST is orchestral, but also like has electric guitars and stuff.
Right.
So, you got like two different approaches and then like everything in between.
I do a third category as well.
Sure. What's your third category?
Which is games where the music is the game.
That's true. Yeah.
So
dancing games.
Yeah, like Dance Dance Revolution, Guitar Hero, Rock Band. Even Sayonara Wild Hearts in a slightly different way, of course, because that music is original, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in those kind of, most of them being rhythm-based games, but still, that category obviously feels different. Although no less impressive. I was talking to Clickbait Boyfriend about those games specifically before this episode, and about how they, to be honest, like they were musical influences for a lot of people during the time they were very popular. So that's my third, much smaller category, probably. One thing, I mean, there's so much to talk about soundtracks. So Emma, feel free at any point to jump in with sort of directions you want to take this.
Of course.
But something I've been trying to tease out for myself is how much my attachment to given songs comes from just repeated exposure, and how much comes from there being something genuinely special about the song. Yeah.
Well, before this episode, I made myself like an off the top of my head playlist of tracks I like, limiting myself to like one per game because you can't just like put the whole Kingdom Hearts soundtrack on there. Call it a day.
Although you mostly did. I was looking at it, I was like, there's a lot of Kingdom Hearts here. I know
there's only 4.
I know they're each from a different game.
And they're each from a different game. And they're pretty significantly different from each other, too, at least. But something I was noticing, when I first did it and looked at it, I was like, well, there's no correlation here. It was the first time I looked at it, I was like, there's no pattern. There's happy songs and sad songs and fight songs and little songs and long songs and, whatever. But then I looked at it again and I was trying to think a little bit more about it. And one of the things I was thinking about was like, well, some of these songs are maybe not actually like if I was to pick a favorite from the soundtrack in isolation. But they're ones that I remember because of the experience I had while that song was playing. Like especially the Final Fantasy VII Remake one, because that one's so fresh for me. Like that song that I picked, it's just like a rematch or something, isn't my favorite song from the soundtrack as a whole. But because the fight and the moment that song plays over is so extremely intense, and comes at the end of like a really stellar chapter, the sequence, whole thing, that song like really stuck in my memories, so that as soon as I finished the game, like that was the first song I was looking for, even though like theoretically there's ones that I like better just like in terms of listening to. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I think that can be an influence too, especially for games. And like fights in particular, because those can be long and you've got the song playing and you're feeling the emotions of playing it, and it sticks in your head as well.
No, that absolutely makes sense. I have a hard time, like I can't think of that many games that aren't games that I spent a lot of time with where I have particular songs that stick out to me, really.
Yeah.
Maybe for me, Nier is the exception, given that I haven't finished it.
Yeah.
And that the song at the little robot village is so distinctive.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the songs that I think of as being quite a lot of fun, and the ones that I like bop around to in the apartment, are from games that I've spent a lot of time with. But it's like, on the other hand, the Persona soundtrack is objectively great. So the fact that I'm running around like screaming, you never saw it coming every time something unexpected happens, like probably has more to do with the quality of the song than it does with me spending like over 100 hours on that game, but who knows?
Yeah. I had a couple of games that I've only spent a little bit of time with. There was one from Code Vein that I really liked, and I only really spent like 4 or 5 hours on that game. And one from the Ace Attorney spinoff that's never been localized, that's just a character theme that is infectious. But I haven't played that, and I've only watched bits of it. But other than that, I think that a lot of the ones I picked are games that I also have an emotional attachment to, I guess. But then again, is it the soundtrack helping me make that emotional attachment?
Right? It's
sometimes?
that circular reasoning.
Where is the beginning there?
It's a chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah.
One soundtrack that I could never listen to again now, because it's been our PS4 background music for like a year, is the Crash Team Racing theme. I'm just kidding. It's a great song, but it comes on every time I turn on the PS4.
You could change the theme, you know.
I know. I would have to figure out how to do that, though. Is there a theme of Kiryu singing Judgment?
I don't know.
Is there a theme of Kiryu doing lively interjections to Judgment, actually?
If only.
If only. Okay, here's a question. The greatest video game music lyric of all time.
That's a lot.
I've got a strong contender.
I bet I can guess what your contender is.
What do you think?
Whatever that line from Detonation is.
Yes! Rise up like a vortex, cortex.
Exactly.
Reality is full of immorality.
Don't sing too much of it.
I'm doing a spoken word representation.
Uh-huh. Yes, I am rather fond of nonsense lyrics, although that's not necessarily exclusive to video games.
Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about the process of creating soundtracks for video games, because I know we both looked into this some. It seems like it just must be absurdly difficult. That's my big takeaway.
I mean, in the olden days, right?
Days.
If you listen to old soundtracks, like from the 8-bit, 16-bit era, those sorts of cartridges only had a certain amount of space on it, right? And your soundtrack takes up space. So you couldn't exactly do, like, sweeping orchestrals back then. You got a lot of, like, chip tunes, basically. Little beeps and boops that made sounds, which I find really impressive, honestly, to make, like, compelling songs that are basically just little computer sounds. Not that some orchestral music isn't basically computer sounds, but you know what I mean.
You know, some art works best if you give them some boundaries.
Fair,
and
yeah.
There's some real boundaries there in the 8-bit world.
There sure is. So I think the process has definitely changed from then to now, in which you have discs and just digital space. You don't necessarily have to worry as much about how much room your soundtrack is taking up.
How interesting, though, that so many of the kind of most iconic themes and soundtracks do come out of that era. You know, Mario and Zelda and I don't know what's 8-bit and 16-bit, but all the Pokemon sounds are the same, right? Like, all of those things have been carried over, you know, for decades because they start from such a strong foundation.
Yeah. Just that now they can use real instruments or things that sound like real instruments versus little boopy boops.
Yes, the technical term.
That's what I call them.
That's probably how they're listed in the credits. Little Boopy Boops by Joanna Smith. But as Emma said, obviously it's a really different process now to compose for games than when it was composing for Super Mario, right?
Yeah.
Because Super Mario originally, like, it runs a certain amount of time. The theme song goes that long, right? And it's good music, but it only has to run that exact amount of time, and it doesn't really react to anything that you do in the world, right? Unless you die.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, here's the song. Whereas now, I mean, obviously, games are much more complicated, which makes scoring them, again, what seems to be just, like, absolutely impossible to me. Just like, how does this ever happen?
What I find really impressive is the ability of, like, being able to write a song that will loop forever, that doesn't get annoying. You know? You have to write, certain games you have to write, like, area themes, right? Like, field themes. Like, you're in this town, this is the song that plays. But, like, if you spend a lot of time in that town, that song needs to be both good, but not, like, infuriating after a while.
You're thinking of Deep Jungle, aren't you?
Yes, I am thinking of Deep Jungle, the failure in that regard.
That's the real reason that they cut that game out of everything.
Yeah, they didn't want to do that soundtrack again. It was a mistake.
No, it's true. It's how do you get something that can loop forever and people aren't going to hate it? I was talking, a friend of mine posted about video game soundtracks the other day, which maybe sparked this idea in my head. I can't remember if I thought of this before this.
No, it was from your mom.
I know it was from Mom. Yeah, duh. But I can't remember if that post was before or after. Because I picked this one pretty early this time.
Yeah, you did.
But anyway, I posted asking for video game soundtracks, and I was like, oh, Persona 5. And they were like, you know, this is awesome, except that Mementos theme is no good. Because I have to listen to it forever. And it doesn't change. And I was like, you know, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But at that point, it's like, what could you do? Right?
Well, you could have different versions for different levels of mementos, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what you could do. My point, though, was going to be, you know, how much time of your Persona playthrough do you spend in Mementos, right? Probably a full day.
Yeah.
Right? Probably 24 hours. I'm just saying, right?
Somewhere there, yeah.
It's like some ridiculous amount of time. And what an impossible challenge to come up with a theme that isn't going to drive you nuts when you're spending a couple hours at a time there many times.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, so there's that, right? There's the challenge of, can you create something that loops forever in a way that doesn't drive you nuts? See KK Fair, my favorite KK Slider song. By which I mean just the worst KK Slider song. does not loop in a way that is acceptable. You can't even be in the room with it for 5 seconds before it drives you nuts. So of course it's the one I sing the most often because it's stuck in my head.
Right, of course.
But also, how can you smoothly transition between different themes?
Right.
Because if the player has relatively broad control over where they're going, you know, how do you layer in the enemy theme in a way that is relatively seamless and it isn't just like you pass that tree, enemy music, you're behind the tree, calm music.
Yeah.
So obviously that's a real challenge. And yeah, just you're composing a frickin' symphony, basically, for games now. They're so long. They need so much music.
That is another difference of, like, you get all this more space, but because you can use all these more instruments, especially for larger releases, it must be so much more expensive to make the soundtrack. Because you have to hire all those players, right?
Yeah.
To play the music, to put in the game. If you're doing, like, a real orchestral thing.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time.
And it sounds like even more than that. Now, granted, this is the point in the episode where I reveal how little I know about the recording industry. So feel free to jump in our DMs or whatever and say, Madelyn, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's fine. But I imagine a lot of the time if you are recording an orchestra, right, you can just record the orchestra, more or less, right? You don't have to do like, I'm going to record the violins. I'm going to record the violas. You probably have to do some of that.
I wonder how it works, actually.
Me too.
I don't know.
Assuming that is sometimes possible, it sounds like in games that is probably not how this goes, at least for some things.
No, I wouldn't think so.
I was reading an article with, oh boy, she has a very European kind of name, so I'm gonna pronounce this wrong. Amir Noon. Anyway,
sure.
She's a video game composer, which, number one, she, in college, had a friend at one point who was, in this interview, she's talking about this, where she was like, oh yeah, my friend, was composing for something and, gave us some beer money to help out with it. And then, a little while later, her brother calls her being like, you worked on Metal Gear Solid? And she was like, no, I didn't. And he's like, your name's in the credits. So, imagine accidentally working on that one.
It's nice that, it's nicer than, you worked on it for a little bit, but your name's not in the credits, right?
Yeah.
It's a much better surprise to not know your name is in the credits.
I mean, yes, a good surprise is always better than a bad surprise. Thank you, Emma. But still, that first I was like, what? Come on. But she was talking, she's now a successful video games composer in her own right. And was talking about how they record using something called striping, which basically means they'll record each, the strings separately and the percussion separately, they record each part separately, which so they'll compose so that each of those pieces can work on its own as a functioning piece of music, which obviously is probably not the case in a lot of orchestral work, right? And that way you can kind of layer in and isolate or bring out different pieces as triggers happen in the world. Which, yeah, just seems deeply complicated. Yeah. She the headline of this article is today Mozart would be a video game composer. Cause he liked that kind of puzzle, apparently. Which is funny to think about.
Mozart would be a gamer.
Maybe he wouldn't be a gamer, but he would enjoy composing for video games.
He would be a gamer. Gamer TM.
Mozart is a gamer. That's the subtitle this week.
Yes, that'll be the subtitle. That's good. All right, writing that down right now.
Thanks. Yeah. But I was also interested to see how ingrained many composers seem to be with the development process. I'm reading another few various interviews where people were talking about the difference between composing for video games and composing for film, right? Which in many ways are the things we've already been talking about, right? But also that, they're always receiving early animations and they're working on it much more collaboratively And many of these composers seem to be like working from the perspective of being people that love games and wanting to really serve the game in a way that was interesting and exciting. And in contrast to the ways that the voice actors are often treated. Right? Just how ingrained these people were in the process. Which makes sense if you want things to be effective.
Yeah, it does.
It is amazing to me, though, how many of these composers, like, from the 8-bit days are, like, still working.
Yeah.
It just feels like a totally different set of skills.
I don't know if it is. I mean, you write the music, just nowadays you have more instruments to work with.
I know. I mean, of course these people are talented composers in their own right. It just feels like a different set of skills to be able to compose a very catchy little melody, basically, to being able to score a gigantic game.
Well, they grew up with games also.
You're right,
that's the
of
thing.
course.
Right? Like, maybe they started out with those skills, but then as, like, developers asked them to do other things, they learned how to do other things.
No, you are, of course, right. I'm just thinking, like, the guy who composes for Animal Crossing, like, started off at Nintendo, like, he was, like, 23. Now he's still doing it. I mean, the man is literally KK Slider. Genuinely. Like, imagine being able, like, you're such the composer that you get to name the cool musician character after yourself.
Yeah. Who doesn't wear any clothes?
The naked musician gets to be named after you. By the way, you posted an article in our little notes thing from Paste about people picking their like favorite games with your little like snippy comment about like nothing but respect for the guy who chose Mario
It wasn't
Paint.
snippy, it's sincere. It was the only one that stuck out to me is like, wow, that's unconventional.
Okay, but Mario Paint is a little bit soundtrack famous, actually. Because it's the first appearance of Totaka's song. I'm sorry, wait. Totaka's. Sorry, I can't read my own typing. Totaka's song. So Totaka is real life KK Slider.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently he has this like really simple little ditty that he sneaks into all of his compositions.
That's cute.
Like, it's just in all of the stuff he does for Nintendo. Like, you can try to find it. It's not, like, literally in every single one, but it's in a lot. It's in enough of them that people look for it.
Mm-hmm.
And Mario Paint, first appearance.
Wow.
I was shocked that the Paste thing...
Really nothing but respect for this guy, then.
Genuinely.
This guy who chose Mario Paint as one of the best soundtracks of all time.
It's a meme lord choice. In the real meaning of the word, like meme, like the world ends with you meaning of the word.
Right.
The world ends with you falls into kind of an interesting soundtrack niche, right?
Yeah.
Like kind of along. I mean, obviously the feel of it is very different from Persona, but kind of in that Persona world of there are actual genuine pop songs here.
Yeah, no, they like got a bunch of real Shibuya bands from the time to
I didn't know that.
write the music for it. Yep.
That's dope.
Yeah. I mean, it adds to that. It's all about Shibuya, so it makes sense that the soundtrack should be at least the... When did it come out? 2006 sound of Shibuya.
Fair enough. I do think so. It's very hard for me to call to mind too many examples of games where the style of music isn't emotional orchestra.
Yeah.
Like you've listed some here, like throughout your things. Like obviously Supergiant has and we saw their concert at PAX. Remember PAX? That was a different world.
Yeah.
That shouldn't have happened. They should have that was a dangerous thing.
If it had been a week later, they would have canceled it. But
it was like at the same time. I was just reading an article. Anyway, we'll talk about this later. But like obviously Supergiant has a very specific kind of folk influenced sound.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that there are other games, so like please DM me with your great game soundtracks. But I haven't encountered too many other folk infused game soundtracks.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's I don't mean to Doom, right?
Right. It's like
really metal soundtrack, like genuinely metal soundtrack. And then there's stuff like Persona and The World Ends With You that has this more kind of like pop infused or pop rock theme.
Yeah.
But I couldn't think of too many others that have soundtracks that are just like fully made up of that. I don't know if you have any more in your memory bank.
I mean, the Danganronpa soundtrack, a little bit, like, it's not, I wouldn't put it in the same category as stuff like Kingdom Hearts or Nier or Final Fantasy or whatever, but it's not exactly, like, poppy. It's like anxiety music. Music that makes you anxious.
Music,
whatever genre that is. And The Last of Us soundtrack is just like one guitar the whole time through. One acoustic guitar, basically.
That's much sparer, but I still feels like falls into the orchestra-y category.
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, obviously it's one guitar, it's not an orchestra, but still.
I mean, I think it's slightly different in that it sounds more like soulful singer-songwriter music without the lyrics versus, like, orchestra, like fair classical enough. You know, but that's all I've got, really.
Well, it will be interesting. For the vast majority of games, right, the point of the soundtrack is to just not be bad, right? Like, you've mostly succeeded with your soundtrack if nobody notices it, and if people are noticing it, man, you better hope it's because it's like the greatest soundtrack of the year.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're in trouble.
I think it's interesting, though, like, the other observation I made from making this list is, one, it's mostly Japanese games on here, which might say more about my personal taste than anything. But I was also thinking, like, well, it feels like Western games tend to take our soundtrack should just be atmospheric, fade into the background type thing. Whereas you get a lot more sort of assertive soundtracks from stuff like Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts and Fire Emblem and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. In that it's like, we're the soundtrack, you're gonna listen.
Oh man, the Fire Emblem dubstep. How did I not talk about that one?
Oh yeah. I love the dubstep too, and it just comes out of nowhere. It's like that one song is like, why do we not go further into this whole subplot in Fire Emblem? I wish there was more on it so that I could get more dubstep music.
It's so funny. I was playing that level. I started that level not like back when we left the house. Like when Click Boyfriend was like out for something, and he came back in and he's like, "What is this?"
There is something to be said about, like, having a song that is entirely stylistically different from the rest of your soundtrack, which I wouldn't necessarily say about the dubstep. It still feels kind of in keeping with some of the other tunes.
There is, but you better hope that song is the Fire Emblem dubstep song and not Kingdom Hearts 2 Atlantica's Swim This Way.
Yeah, I mean it a little differently than that. But one thing that, having played Trails of Cold Steel recently and liked it, one thing that was really, like, incredibly effective is the not final boss, but the weird boss that is next to the final boss. It's right before the final boss. Like, before this had been, like, good music, but pretty standard, like, background classical music. And then you go into, like, this big white void full of swords, and there's a huge shadow monster, and there is intense Latin choral booming in the background. And it just made me sit up and go, oh, wait a minute.
More games should go for the Latin choral, is I think what Emma's big takeaway this week is.
I mean, that's just like, it's just like the sheer contrast between, like, I put 2 songs from that game on there because I couldn't not include that song, because I was just going through it, and then the choral starts playing. It's like, what is happening? It was the soundtrack more than anything, where I was like, okay, this game is moving somewhere different for a minute than it has been. So it's a good way to like shake your player, I guess.
It can definitely make you sit up and take notice. You just better hope it's in a good way.
Yeah.
No, the better example for the Kingdom Hearts song that doesn't fit is the they're not called Dream Eaters. The
da, da,
yeah.
Da, da, na, na. It is the Dream Eaters, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, they are. They are Dream Eaters. They're not nightmares.
Yeah.
It's the Dream Eater Pokemon song.
What do you mean? That's a great song.
I know. I'm not saying it's not.
That's a stellar song.
I'm just saying. It does feel like something a little more out of Pokemon. Okay, finally, I guess. The one place that I do feel like pop music and licensed music does still make appearances is in, like, opening cinematic type situations.
Yeah.
Right? Like, obviously, Kingdom Hearts, the ones from Tales from the Borderlands still stick with me.
Yeah, I really like those.
Really well put together.
Really, any anime game
yeah.
has, like, its opening sequence with some sort of pop song over it, so... it's not really licensed, but they feel different than the rest of the soundtrack, like the Persona ending credits songs as well, I really like. Which, again, is not, like, really licensed, but it feels different than the rest of the soundtrack, yeah.
Create your own song that you would have licensed if it existed. Yeah. That's fine. So yeah, I don't know. Any soundtrack things you wish you saw more often?
Oh, world building soundtracks. I love the Stamp song in Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's just, there's this character in the game that's Stamp. It's an icon. It's a dog. That is a Shinra mascot, basically. It's like loyal Stamp doing his best for Shinra, right? And there's a whole soundtrack. There's a whole song for Stamp that you can find and listen to. You can put it on the jukebox. That is this incredibly catchy song about how Stamp is doing his best. And even though he's not very good at things, he gets distracted by sticks and whatever. He's doing good. And then the last few lyrics are like, if only we could all be like Stamp at Shinra, basically. Which is just like this incredibly catchy propaganda song that, like, if you walk around certain areas, you can, like, hear people sort of singing to themselves, not being able to remember all the words. And I really, really like that touch because it makes it feel like this sort of, like, you feel more than, like, the story just telling you how much, like, this corporation has, like, infested this entire city. Which I thought was just so cool. So you don't really see that as much, you know?
Yeah, you want more diegetic music.
Yeah.
Yeah, Click My Boyfriend was talking about how in the Fallout games, you can either have the kind of generic soundtrack, or you can, like, turn your radio on and basically listen to 50s music, which he felt was really effective with the kind of silly tone of those games, that game. Yeah. I'm down for that. You mean, again, I'm loving the Yakuza karaoke, and the reason that I'm loving it is because they sing it badly. And everyone's like, you're great, and it's like, no, they're not.
Hey, he's enthusiastic.
I know. Karaoke is all about attitude. I won't disagree. Just...
One more thing from my recent playing experience. I watched this video on horror game soundtracks. And one of the first things that was pointed out was, like, there's this soundtrack that plays in, like, Resident Evil safe rooms, right? That's, like, just, like, a calming thing that you're safe once you're in those safe rooms. And having been playing Control, which is not horror, but is, like, certainly suspense, and it's not horror, I guess, as well. There is no "you're safe" music in Control. Your safe music is like the murmured chanting of all the people that are sort of infested with the hiss. There's no music, you just get to hear like mumbled chanting. There's only, oh boy, you're in trouble music. Which I think really contributes to why I cannot play that game for more than like an hour at a time.
Yeah. Because
I am just tense and extremely stressed the whole time. Because I never know when I'm, like, gonna get attacked immediately. Like, it feels like they should at least, like, in the base area have, like, some sort of tune going on. But nope, there's nothing. Which I think is probably partially the point, is you're supposed to feel that sort of tension. But oh boy, I would like it if there was a You're Safe Now song. You know?
Well, meanwhile, I'm over here, making KK play acoustic versions of KK metal and enjoying the hourly themes and switching my fight style in Yakuza when I get tired of the music. So
5 o'clock in Animal Crossing is a bop. That is my favorite. I mean, I haven't heard very many of them, to be fair, because I usually play at like 5 or 6, or rarely like 10 on Saturdays in the morning. But 5 o'clock, oh boy, is that a banger.
You heard it here first, folks.
There was some article that I did not look at before this of like ranking all the different Animal Crossing hourly themes, which I feel like I should look at and make sure that 5 o'clock is number 1, as it should be.
I haven't heard any of the like late night ones, so.
I haven't either, that's fair. Maybe the late night ones are transcendent.
Yeah,
but...
and they're just like, you're up this late? Like, yikes, here you go.
You really need a good song right now, it seems like. Are you okay?
Yeah. Well, any closing thoughts?
Soundtracks are good. I like going to the Final Fantasy VII Remake ones and having it broken down into phases 1 through 7. And being really... thinking that's wild. There's like this new feature on YouTube that like if you put the timestamps in the descriptions, it'll actually, like as you mouse over the bar, it'll show you where those start.
Oh.
Which is really cool.
That's handy.
But like if you're looking at, whatever fan has posted the Final Fantasy Remake song that'll go down in like 3 days, it's a little intimidating. Like you mouse over, it's like, oh, phase 7. That sounds like compared to phase 1.
Well, there you have it, folks.
That's my last thought.
We've come down on the side of soundtracks are good. Who would have thought?
Yeah. We're pro soundtrack.
Imagine if this whole episode had been us being like, there shouldn't be soundtracks.
All video games should be deathly silent.
In the name of realism.
Yeah.
Like, as we approach realism in graphics, really there shouldn't be music.
Because there is no music in the real world.
Yeah.
The real world has no music. This is entirely a video game invention.
So it is ordered. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
We've had a lovely time talking about video game soundtracks. I'm sure we'll continue talking about them off the air, and now I have to go jam to a bunch of tunes, by which I mean sing karaoke.
Oh, you know what else I'm glad was before this whole situation happened?
What?
The Near Orchestra concert in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very glad I got to go to that before traveling stopped being a thing.
This really was our year of video game concerts, huh? 3 in 1 year. Can you imagine?
What's the third one?
Kingdom Hearts.
What's the second one?
Supergiant.
Oh, right. Sorry, that just sort of lumped into PAX and that huge, ginormous merch line that we waited in for.
That merch line where everyone got the virus, probably.
You know what? We avoided it. We got out of there soon enough to not catch it.
Oh, boy. Oh, man. Well, folks, do you have a favorite video game soundtrack or a specific song? Or do you have a song that you hate? Or do you have a song that you feel so mediocre about that you want to share it with us? What is
This is the
forgettable-
most nothing I've felt about a song. Please share it. I'm really interested in
You know
those,
what?
to be honest.
On one of the lists of the best video game songs of all time, you know what was number 3?
What?
Tetris. I was like, how dare you?
What is the Tetris? Was it Tetris? Was it the new one, the VR one?
No, it was
Or
the original
just-
one. Apparently it's based
Oh.
on some Russian folk song.
Oh, well,
I was like, how
I don't
dare
know
you
what
put
that sounds
Tetris
like.
on this soundtrack list?
your arch
At
enemy.
least it wasn't number 1. If it had been number 1, I would have canceled the podcast. Anyway, yeah, send us your soundtrack thoughts. If you know anything about recording these things, or you're a composer or something, tell us all the ways in which we mischaracterized your work.
Yeah.
Would love to learn more.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about music, to be honest. I just know good. No, don't like.
Good Boyfriend was like, yeah, all good soundtracks are in Lydian mode. And I did remember Lydian mode from Chorus a little bit, but I incorrectly remembered.
I have no
Fa.
idea what that is.
And he was like, what a singer, like, you saying it starts on Fa. Anyway.
All good soundtracks have a time signature. And a key.
And a key. There you have it, folks. That's all it takes. Anyway, if you enjoyed this show, you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talk This Podcast, and we're on YouTube at Talk This Sisters. Are you going to share your playlist of songs? You should.
Sure. Why not?
It's a good time to follow, so you can listen to all of the Kingdom Hearts songs that Emma has on her list. But also, following us on social media helps you keep up with everything that's happening on our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read more about the show, see the games that are in the hat, catch up on past episodes, and check out our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend, literally the last edition coming sometime in the next couple of weeks, so it's the time to binge Clickbait Boyfriend. And also Split Screen, where Emma and I are watching My Hero Academia and Coffee Prince. And also other various blog content. I'm working on an anime wrap-up of my indoor time, which is like only gonna get like the longer I don't write it, the more I'm gonna have to add to it. So I have to write it. But the blog is fun. Always, we love the blog. Check out the blog. And most importantly, if you like the show and you want a reminder of when Sundays at noon are, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora on the app and online, Overcast, Pocket Casts, add some kind of portmanteau of pod and cast, and you'll find us there. And leave a rating and review while you're at it.
Really helps us out. Next time we're talking about Mega Man.
Definitely Mega Man. Now that you say that, 100% agree. We are talking about Mega Man.
And Ori and the Will-O-Wisps.
Oh, I almost read an article with the composer for that, so I'll have to report back on that next time.
Yeah.
I can't report back on it last time.
We'll just break down that episode, insert a little note from you, put it back up.
Well, that'll be a fun episode. I'm sure in 2 weeks. Actually, Emma has already picked her topic for 2 weeks from now. It's a miracle.
Yeah. Do you want me to say it now?
I was teeing that up for you, but you don't have to share if you don't want to.
We were talking about localization. Bringing, not just translating into another language, but localizing it for another language.
Absolutely. So that'll be 2 weeks from now, unless we come up with something more exciting to offer you.
We'll see.
But that's it for our show. Emma, do you want to send the people off, with a nice little bop?
This week, I hope that you have some nice diegetic music in your life.
How could you have non-diegetic music in your life?
I hope you figure out how to have non-diegetic music in your life.